Right. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Coffee with Monta Fridays, as always. And we're super excited today. We have Andy Miller, the Chief Operations Officer the Chief Executive Officer over at Human Solutions. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you, Monta. Good morning. It's nice to be here. I've got my coffee. I'm with Monta. I'm in the right place.
Yeah.
Life is
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. I think I said COO because when I was a program manager over at Volunteers of America, Oregon, you were the Chief Operations Officer. And
Correct.
you and I got to work a lot around housing, and you were a great mentor for me in terms of me growing in my leadership role. And so it was great to have, as a program manager, to have access to you during my few years over at Volunteers of America. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Those were some good years, and enjoyed working at VOA. But have appreciated the transition back working more closely with issues related to housing and homelessness at Human Solutions.
Absolutely. So with that, Andy, why don't you tell us about Human Solutions and what you all do and kind of what you got on the table right now?
Sure. We're Human Solutions is now a 31-year-old nonprofit organization that is based in East Portland and Gresham and focuses on the issues related to poverty and homelessness in East Multnomah County. Um, our mission is to, and our mission's changed in the wording of it in the last couple of years. Our mission is to counter the forces that are creating poverty and homelessness in East Multnomah County. And I say that because we're really in a process of transition from what I think many people would call a social services organization to what we like to think of as a social justice organization. And it's not to say that we've stopped providing the kinds of social services we've been historically known for. It's more a recognition that we are never going to end poverty and homelessness if we address those issues one family at a time. We really need to address the systemic forces like systemic racism and some of the way our market economy works that are creating a shortage of housing and an overpriced housing market that's out of reach of many of the folks who need to meet the vital need for housing. So toward that end, we really focus, I would say, in four primary areas or activities. We have what we think of as prevention services, and those are really to make sure folks don't fall into the most extreme conditions that can exist alongside poverty, like homelessness. And so we provide millions of dollars of rental assistance and utility assistance to help folks maintain their housing security. Um, then along with those prevention services, we provide direct services specifically to homeless families and individuals. So we operate three shelters for one for families and now two for unaccompanied adult women who are experiencing homelessness. And I can say more about um, how we went from two to three. It's related to COVID. But we provide those three shelter services and then a range of permanent supportive housing opportunities so that folks transitioning out of homelessness can do so sustainably with the long-term rent supports, deeply affordable housing, and the kind of supportive services that folks often need when they're transitioning out of homelessness. Third area in which we work is employment and career development. So we have a suite of programs that provide career coaching, help people set career goals, create sometimes for folks their very first resume, prep for that first interview, find living wage jobs and secure them and get the support they need to keep them. And then our fourth area is as an affordable housing developer and operator. So We have now a little over 670 affordable housing units in operation, another 75 that will come online in March, and another 130 or so that are in the pipeline, meaning they're in some state of pre-development and will be operating in the community in the next couple of years.
Wow, all that sounds exciting. I know that housing development is kind of where your heart's at least when we were at school. And so it's super exciting to see that you're expanding out and just creating capacity for folks to have affordable housing. I know for us at Bridges, since we do a lot of single family homes, I think we have about 60 or so right
Mhm.
now. It's getting more and more expensive to get these homes and keep, even group living affordable. And I'm just curious with your work that you're doing specifically in East County,
Mhm.
how much of gentrification is kind of leading the need for more expansion for affordable housing out there, and do you see a correlation with that?
Yeah, that's a huge issue. The threat of residential displacement to the folks that we see and serve and are part of our community every day. The threat of gentrification is huge, and in particular, the impact of uh, residential displacement. And so, one really important systemic response to that is to bring more of the rental housing inventory and even the owned housing inventory into the control of nonprofits who have no profit incentive, can keep rents low, and have a long-term mission of promoting uh, people's long-term housing security. So, as I said, we have over 650 apartments in operation. Um, Many of those are in their third decade of operation, and what we're seeing is families who've raised their children in that housing. It's been a permanent home. And we like to draw the distinction between a home and housing. So, these are not just rental units that we're producing. They're people's homes. They're places where kids have their birthday parties through the years. It allows families to have control over the neighborhoods in which they're going to live. And I guess that's the second piece of how we're starting to think about affordable housing development, and that is not just developing housing itself, but thinking about how to improve the neighborhoods of East County by adding assets that we know that the community needs. So our next project that's coming online is in a neighborhood that is very threatened by residential displacement, and that's the Gateway neighborhood
Mm.
around 122nd and Halsey. So we're building a new mixed use project called the Nick Fish, named after our recently deceased friend, Commissioner Nick Fish, who was a champion of both housing and parks. And if I could share my screen for a minute. Nope, that's not going to work. I was going to show a picture of it, but the Nick Fish is a project that we is under construction and will be completed in March of 2021, and it's 75 units of mixed income housing. So 2/3 of the housing units will be affordable to low income families, and 1/3 will be market rate, so that we have a mix of incomes living in the same property. It's built directly on Discovery Park, East Portland's newest park. And it also includes 10,000 feet of commercial retail and 10,000 square feet of office space, which will form our newest anchor office for Human Solutions. So more than just adding the housing, it's adding to the vitality of the park. The families that live there will be able to enjoy the park as their backyard. They'll have access to what we hope, all bets are off given COVID, but what we hope will be an active retail presence that'll include, shops, greengrocers, restaurants, perhaps a bagel shop, so that it will not only add the housing, but will add assets and livability to the neighborhood. And so we think more and more that if we can build these kind of mixed use, broad ranging housing communities that in one of our other projects, we have developed a Head Start childcare. Childcare is a huge unmet need. So folks who live in the affordable housing, this one's out in Rockwood, can take advantage of on-site childcare and not even have to get in the car to take their kids to daycare. So by thinking like this, by having our housing designed and developed in a way that supports the needs of the neighborhood and the needs of folks who are going to live there, we begin to develop the kind of neighborhoods that folks can thrive in.
Mm,
So it's getting beyond just the safety net provision of housing and toward a long-term, creating long-term communities in East County in which folks can thrive. And the research by folks like Raj Chetty says that place is hugely important, and where a child grows up is hugely important. And for families, having a sense of investment and involvement in their neighborhood is hugely important. So we're trying to build more than housing. We're really trying to help build neighborhoods in partnership with the people who live there.
yeah. So really helping families be able to root down into their neighborhood so they feel part of and they have a place. And that's you're really talking about a true home environment.
Yes, and I think the next some of the next things we're exploring along those lines is how to integrate some affordable home ownership for folks who are ready for that, and can take advantage of that opportunity. Um, Partnering with culturally specific organizations to make sure that the housing that we develop is benefiting the Black and Brown people who have, on a policy level, been most excluded from secure housing and from homeownership opportunities and even from rental housing through discriminatory policies and practices. So really trying to be intentional and think beyond the notion of just building more units, but actually building very intentional communities. And I guess the last piece of that really is this focus on supportive housing, because increasingly we see not every family needs the kind of supports, but some do, and some need, what used to be called wraparound services, but we think of more as family partnerships. So folks who have experienced homelessness aren't expected to just do it on their own because their rent's a little bit below the market, that they have the kind of longer term support and frankly, behavioral health linkages that they may need. So our project after the Nick Fish is tentatively being called Stark Street Housing. That's at 162nd and Stark. It's 93 apartments, but 16 of them will be supportive housing for families. And we have a relationship going in with LifeWorks, a behavioral health organization that will have on-site staffing of behavioral health specialists that are there to support the mental, emotional, and behavioral health needs of the 16 families who will be moving into the supportive housing units.
That's fantastic. It sounds like, and from what I've heard from talking to some of your staff members and former staff members over the past few months, you guys have done a ton of equity work um, over there at Human Solutions. And really, from what you're describing, of one, how our Black and Brown communities are impacted by policy, also very impacted by our gentrification um, uh, situation that's happening here in Portland. And so, I guess how would you describe Human Solutions leads with that equity lens to make sure that the most impacted people are getting the supports that they need?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, that our commitment to racial equity work manifests in a number of ways, and um, it is an ongoing journey that we are on, and it has been a very intense and at times uncomfortable journey. We are a white-led organization, and we are, and yet the community that we serve and the participants in our programs in residential housings are majority Black and Brown folks. And so that equity and leading with it really means being conscious at every moment, including the internal decisions in our organization, who's making them, who has power in the room, who doesn't, and how do we hear from the voices of our staff and our community that are most impacted by the decisions that our organization makes. So that's a journey that we really began formally about 3 years ago when we adopted a strategic and equity plan and set a goal to become an anti-racist organization. So that's anti-racist is a term of art, which is essentially to recognize that simply being not racist, which is often, so often where people find themselves or want to find themselves, I'm not racist, isn't enough. And when we've lived with 400 plus years of national policy defined by white supremacy, it's not enough to be not racist. We need to become anti-racist and truly work intentionally for the benefit of people, as you say, who have been most excluded from the benefits of housing and economic security. So what does that look like? In part, it looks like for us being very intentional about who we serve and looking at our outcome data to make sure that the people with whom we partner and who live in our housing are representative of the demographics of the low-income community that that is our neighborhood, that is our service area. It means partnering with organizations. Last night we did a fundraiser featuring an anti-racism speaker, Dr. Ibram Kendi, in dialogue with Joanne Hardesty, who is a vice president of the Board of Human Solutions and also a Portland City Commissioner, around the topic of anti-racism. Knowing that we were going to attract a wide audience and raise funds, we intentionally sought to partner with a culturally specific organization and dedicated half of the proceeds raised during the evening to an organization called Beyond Black that is working for the betterment of the African American community, particularly in East Multnomah County. In terms of our housing work, we are right now trying to navigate some of the challenges of and constraints of fair housing, which has the ironic result of making it harder to prefer in your housing admissions any one race, even if you're trying to benefit Black and Brown communities who have been excluded from housing because of discriminatory practices. But one of the things we are exploring is what's called a local preference. And that's essentially to set some of the vacant housing units that you're developing aside for families that are currently living in the community, or in this case, we're looking at school boundaries and essentially saying, we know that East County schools, especially in Reynolds, experience high rates of displacement, or in school terms, they call that school mobility. And that's the percentage of kids who were there in October and aren't there in May because they've had to move. They've been evicted. They couldn't afford the rent anymore. And so what we're trying to do is explore a policy that would allow some of our housing to be set aside specifically for lower income families who are already housing insecure in the neighborhoods where we're building housing that by definition in which they won't be housing insecure because the rent is permanently affordable. So we're trying to think through some of those kinds of policy approaches to more intentionally and directly benefit the communities that we're serving. And I'd say the other thing that we're doing is we're in the process of forming our first resident advisory council, and so that will be a supported council of residents of our existing affordable housing. And before we make policy changes, before we develop new housing, it will be, in a sense, function like a board in that we have to go and get certain levels of approval through consultation with our residents before we make significant changes or undertake new developments. And it's really the equity lens notion of being informed in your decision making by those who are most impacted by the decision before you make the decision. So challenging ourselves to do more and more of that kind of work.
Well, it really is coming through in your language and your share about your organization. And so the amount of work that you've done so far is coming to fruition because I can hear it all throughout everything that you're sharing. For us, we're just a few months into rolling out becoming an anti-racist organization with our statement.
Mhm.
And what we really learned over the past year is how can we really do this work without being anti-racist, right? Because systemically, we're flawed everywhere within all of our organizations. And if we can't address our systemic issues at hand, how are we supposed to do the work that we pointed out? You know, it's more than just one family at a time.
Yeah.
It's a system problem. And so super excited to hear you say that for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, our equity statement and our equity plan are online, but I'll say this. Um, Saying the right words is I find comes that's the easy part for us white leaders. We were trained and educated to seek out and use the right language. The question for us will be, will we are we ready to walk the talk, and what does that look like? And most importantly, who is defining the path in which we will walk? Is it us as white leaders, or is it our Black and Brown communities and staff? So that has been, the most challenging part of the journey for me personally hasn't been arriving at the commitments. It has been realizing how deeply embedded white supremacy is and how hard you have to work to see it and find ways to counter it on a daily basis. It's not one act, it's not publishing one statement or one plan. It is an ongoing and daily task, and it needs to be informed by the widest audience of folks. So we worked with and are continuing to work with some really excellent consultants, Subduction Consulting,
Mhm.
a two-person team that has been working with us and really uh, helping us wake up. We've been engaged in this process of thought leadership and trying to bring thought leaders on racial equity into our organization and into our community. So last night it was Ibram Kendi. Last year it was a woman named Mia Birdsong who writes and speaks um, in very new and vigorous ways about poverty and the power within communities that have experienced poverty. And we discovered Mia and brought her into town to speak to our staff and speak to our community, and um, really trying to confront ourselves with concepts and ideas that are new to us and that challenge us to think and look at the issues we're working with in very different ways. Because it's been said a million times, if we keep doing things the same way, we're going to get the same results. And, I think a challenge for social service practitioners is to see how what we are doing um, is helpful on one hand, but also in some ways um, an ongoing part of a system that has kept things the way they are for so many communities that experience poverty.
Yeah.
There's an argument to be made that all social services do is make wealth inequity feel a little bit more comfortable to the wealthy.
Yeah.
And we're talking about that too. We're having these hard conversations. Don't have all the answers, but are asking ourselves new questions.
That's fantastic. Lastly, I just wanted to appreciate solutions. We just talked briefly beforehand. It sounds like you just recently, your board approved to come out in support of Measure 110,
Yes.
the decriminalization of small amounts of drug possession, and also opens up marijuana tax revenue to expand treatment services, specifically recovery access sites around the state. And
Yeah.
such a big deal for Oregon right now. There is opposition out there to this, actually within our own network of providers. What I've learned in terms of our equity work and just being part of, well, I'll just say it because it's public, is I'm on the board of Oregon Council of Behavioral Health, that is an association for all providers in the state. And the board decided to come out in opposition against Measure 110, and I was the only opposition to that opposition. And I started to really give this some thought of like, how is this happening? Why is this happening? And there's all this talk about, the 60 to 100 million is going to go to Oregon Health Authority and the money's going to get stolen. There's all this, political back end funding
Right.
stuff, well about all that stuff. But the reality is the Criminal Justice Commission did a study and they analyzed Measure 110 and has the potential, according to them, to reduce arrests by 95% and reduce convictions at about 94% for our Black and Brown communities.
Yeah.
Now, if this measure alone just did that and we didn't have any funding to go with it, that is a huge win. And
Yeah.
everything else to me is a moot point, right? And so again, it's white dominant systems making decisions for Black and Brown communities, one without having the voices at the table, and thinking about how their systems might get impacted rather than let's do some work and be allies to our Black and Brown communities.
Yeah. I would say for sure, when we looked at Measure 110 and our board just did its endorsement votes on Monday night and this week. And by the way, that is a huge change for us. We've not been as politically active with endorsements historically, but again, a part of our strategic and equity plan in this recognition of the systemic nature of racism, poverty, homelessness. Um, if we're not addressing the broken policies, I don't care how much rent assistance we give out, we're not really impacting the breadth of issues that our community experiences. So I would say for us, we're not a treatment organization, although we partner with many. The revenue side was probably not as much of a motivator as is as you say, the decriminalization side.
Yeah,
If you talk to any organization working on housing and homelessness, you see the long-term impact um, of criminal justice involvement, which for so many people is related to, substance issues um, and issues of addiction. You see the long-term impact and how much it harms their ability to maintain just housing and economic security. And I can't think of a more counter uh, non-logical outcome that you would want folks who experience those issues to experience housing instability, to experience barriers to getting employment. Because what little I know about addiction is um, that safety, structure, and security are so key to recovery. If you take those things away, by making it harder to find a rental apartment, by making it harder to secure employment. You are putting a person who is in, the struggle of their lifetime to recover from addiction at such a high risk. Anything that reduces the criminal justice outcomes for folks who are experiencing addiction, um, just through the lens of housing, is helpful and systemic and real. Um, so yeah, I think that one was a no-brainer. I have to say, we looked at probably a list of 7 measures, and it shocked me that in a ballot in November that we already know has uh, a top line and a highlight line that everyone's paying attention to and that is newsworthy on a daily or hourly basis.
Yeah.
There's actually a lot below that line that's going to impact our community. I was shocked to see how many measures, but I would say for us, 110 was the easiest one to get behind. So I'm shocked to hear that there's a movement and a cadre of behavioral health organizations that are opposed to it. That just, yeah, seems seems illogical and does raise significant questions of equity and who's making that decision. But we're fully behind it. We've endorsed it, and when we endorse a measure, we typically will contribute financially to the campaign, and it frees our staff up to do things like phone bank and participate in, the limited ways you can as a nonprofit for the passage of the measure. And again, it's an arena in which we've gotten more active, and frankly, our board and staff have really appreciated it.
Yeah.
Because,
That's
yeah,
fantastic. I mean, and if you would, I was on phase one of implementation, and now I'm will be on phase two. So if Human Solutions would like to know any of the work that we're doing on the implementation phase of the measure, we'll be happy to come out and
yeah,
share. Well,
we'd love to better understand it. And while we're on it, I guess I'll just add, I'd say the other no-brainer for us to be a big, strong yes on is the preschool for all measure in Multnomah County. Early childhood education is one of the biggest unmet needs in most low-income communities, but particularly in East Multnomah County. And we know we're partnered with families who are on waiting lists, struggling for slots, or can't afford to send their children to preschool. That impacts family incomes and their ability, parents' ability to work. It impacts how ready kids are to start kindergarten, how much early socialization kids get. Um, this measure also is going to directly help the wages of educators in preschool, which is, one of the most undervalued and underpaid occupations there is. And again, the illogic of the people who are caring for our youngest children and starting them on their educational journey are people who we say need not earn professional wages. And so this measure will help in that regard, and that will also help reduce poverty. So that one's a no-brainer and a win-win for us.
well, I want to thank you for. I know you had a big event last night, and you probably got a late start this morning. So thanks for carving out a few moments for us to have this conversation.
Got to have my coffee with you, so
Yeah.
that helps the wake-up call, and always good to be with you, Monta. I very much appreciate you and the work that Bridges to Changes does as well.
Yes, and thank you for your the action you all are taking around your equity work that's coming out of what you wrote and what you said you would do. And I hear that you're doing it. I see that you're doing it. So thank you for that.
Yeah, take a look at our website, humansolutions.org, or find us on Facebook or Twitter. You'll learn a lot about us and our journey. So yeah, happy to be here.
All right. Have a great rest. Have a good weekend.
Yeah, you too, man. Take care. Good to see you.